From first, we have a lesson, poetry, and I want to start straight away by telling you that poetry is easy. Far from the common belief that poetry has a problem, or it is we who have a problem with poetry. I want us to talk about poetry paper 2, not poetry paper 1, where we talk about mnemonics, the sound devices. Here we are talking about comprehensive poetry or comprehension. Comprehension poetry. Comprehension poetry. In other words, a poem where you are supposed to comprehend, read and understand. So, let us read the poem below and then we answer the questions. Crazy Peter Prattles. Whenever you start reading a poem, before you can bring the poem into focus, before you start analyzing the poem, look at the title. The title is very communicative. I remember the poem, Building the Nation. Today I drove the permanent secretary to an important urgent function. In fact, to a luncheon at the Vic. An important urgent function. If you read that poem, you will discover by Henry Barrow, you will discover that the poem is not talking about anything pertaining to building the nation, but destroying the nation. Which means the title of that poem is ironic. If you look at the poem, A Taxi Drive on His Death by Robert Wangusa. When I peer into the future, I see that I shall perish upon this road, driving men that I do not know. This metallic monster that I now dictate, this docile, elaborate horse that in silence seems to simmer and strain. He's talking about that poem, he's talking about his experience on the road. A taxi driver on his death. Yeah? If you read this poem by Atieno Yo. Atieno washes dishes. Atieno wakes up early. Beds are sat down in the kitchen. Atieno 8 years old. Atieno Yo. The title of that poem is Freedom Song. Is that freedom? 8 years old. Atieno wakes up early. Beds are sat down in the kitchen. Atieno plucks the chicken. Look at that. That is slave labor or child labor or child abuse. But the title says Freedom Song. There is no freedom in that poem. Now, if you look at this one here, Crazy Peter Prattles. To prattle, when you prattle, that is gibberish. That is like you are babbling, you are ranting. There is a ranting of a one Peter who is crazy, or a one crazy Peter is ranting. So let us look at stanza 1. So what is the mountain deal about the minister's ailing son that makes boiling news? That is the stanza. 3 lines. So what is the mountain deal about the minister's ailing son that makes boiling news? How come it was not whispered when Tina's hospital bed crawled with maggots and her eyes oozed pus because the doctors lacked gloves? Stanza 3. What about Kasaija's only child who died because the man with the key to the oxygen room was on leave? Stanza 4. I have seen queues of emaciated mothers clinging to babies with translucent skins, faint in line. And the lioness of a nurse commanding tersely, get up or leave the line. Next stanza. Didn't I hear it rumored that the man with the white mane and black robes, whose mouth stores the justice of the land, ushered a rape case out of court because the 7-year-old failed to testify? Stanza 5, the last stanza there. Anyway, I only remember these things when I drink. They are indeed tipsy explosions. Now, that is Susan Nalua Kiguni, Crazy Peter Prados. I want us to go back to the first stanza and do a bit of analyzing. Already I have talked about the title. Now, if you look at the first stanza, when we analyze, we look at the themes. The themes, we look at the language and style. Basically, that's what we look at. When we talk about theme, here we are meaning the subject matter. What is the poem talking about? You know, there are a number of things that we need to look at, but I want you to understand that whenever you are given a poem, there are two ways of understanding what the poem is talking about, or saying what the subject matter is. One, you can use the thematic approach. The poem is talking about oppression, the poem is talking about women empowerment, the poem is talking about education, it's talking about corruption, etc., etc. That is thematic approach. Then we have plot analysis. You look at it from the plot. Plot means what is the story in the poem. The poem is talking about a man, the poem is talking about a boss who was misbehaving at his place of work. Something like that. You know, you are giving the story. So there are two ways. You can choose. All of them are acceptable. So let us go line to line in what is happening in stanza 1. So, what is the mountain deal? Look at that. Mountain deal. A deal that is mountain, that is metaphoric, about the minister's ailing son that makes boiling news. When it is the minister's son, it is making boiling news. That the news is described as boiling news, hot. That is also metaphor. Stanza 2. How come it was not whispered? Here we are talking about boiling news. And here in stanza 2, we are talking about not being whispered. It was not even whispered when Tina's hospital bed crawled with maggots. That Tina was so sick and the wounds in her body probably were petrifying and they were bringing out maggots. And her eyes oozed pus. That must be a terrible situation. Because the doctors lacked gloves. Look at that. Lack of facilities, ill-equipped hospitals, because the doctors lacked gloves. What about Kasaija's only child who died because the man with the key to the oxygen room was on leave? Wouldn't they even break the door? I want you to understand that these poems are readable. They are just readable. The poems that come at this level, they are readable. Why? They are comprehension poems. So, it is important for you. Now, look at that. I have seen queues of emaciated mothers clinging to babies with translucent skins faint in line. And the lioness of a nurse, look at that, lioness of a nurse. Are we supposed to have lioness of a nurse commanding tersely? How? How do they command tersely? Get up or leave the line. In our next part, we shall look at stanza 4. See you there.